Sustainability is no longer a nice to do, it's a must do.
Hmm.
It's transforming the industry, and people are making their buying decisions based on those practices, and it leads to a competitive advantage.
Hmm. Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that has built several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the CEO and founder of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And today we have another great expert episode, and I'm excited to introduce Justin Goldston. And I was going to say Goldstein, and then I'm like, wait a minute, that's not right. But Goldston, and he is what I'd say an expert on kind of sustainability and technology. And now sustainability has a lot of different meanings that can mean different things to different people, and we'll get into that a bit more. But it's going to be a fun episode where we can talk a little bit how to make a sustainable business model, how to be integrate technology, maybe bring in a little bit of other things on. Um, with how do you decrease bottlenecks and how to increase workflow and supply chain and demand and all sorts of fun stuff. So with that, welcome onto the podcast, Justin.
Thanks for having me.
So I gave kind of an introduction as to what we're going to be talking about, but maybe before we dive into that, give me just a little bit of an introduction. Let people know kind of why you're an authority, or why you know what you're talking about.
I am Justin Goldston. I am a professor of project and supply chain management at Penn State University. We're here outside of the research and working with startups and entrepreneurs. We also work closely with organizations on a emphasis on the triple bottom line, which is the emphasis or focus on the people, planet, and profit, and how that can lead to a competitive advantage and how that can lead to increased profitability. Conventional thinking leads to, okay, if I have a lot of investments into healthcare for my employees, if I give them unlimited time off and things like that, that's going to have a negative impact on my bottom line. But research has shown that in the long term, that has a positive impact, and those organizations that have that approach beat their competitors year over year. So that's one thing that we focus on, and that's one thing that we demonstrate to startups and entrepreneurs.
Awesome. No, and I think so. Now let's dive into it, just because you already started to give an intro as to what you do. But if I were to look at sustainability, at least in my mind, it can mean different things to different people, right? In the sense that I can think of sustainability as, hey, recycle. I can think of sustainability as go green and the Green New Deal and AOC, and not get into politics by any means. Or I can think of sustainability as more of, how do I set my company up so that it will be sustainable or it will last for a long time, right? And they're all different ways of being sustainable. One is more of a, hey, I'm going to have an environmental impact. Another is, how do I make, more people focus, and how one is more on the business plan. So how do you define sustainability, or what do you think sustainability means to you?
So I ask professionals this, I ask entrepreneurs this, I ask students this. I say, the United Nations created something they call the Sustainability Development Goals. There are 17 different sustainability development goals, and I show these SDGs to a number of people, and I always say, pick out your top two. Right. So, for example, some of them are no poverty, no hunger, health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water, infrastructure and innovation, reduced inequalities, for example. So whenever I go through that and I have that discussion, everyone has different top twos. And I say that we all have to have top twos, because if we all have the same, then there's going to be some of these development goals that are left out. So for my example, my top two are going to be innovation and education. Because my reasoning is that if I can educate people, if I can do my research, I can use technology, I can use innovation, to handle the other SDGs, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
in my opinion, I can handle all SDGs just by addressing two, right?
Mm.
So that's, I think that's very, those SDGs and are my top two, and work with their workforce to say, okay, as a consensus, what are our top two sustainability development goals?
Mm.
And that's going to be included within our mission and our vision of our organization.
Mm.
And if you focus on those SDGs, you're going to make a positive impact on the world. And you're going to have that as a competitive advantage, because organizations have seen that it's increased their public image by doing good,
Mm.
right? I mean, if we look at the IKEAs, if you look at the Unilevers, if you look at the Levi's,
Mm.
known as sustainable, and organization or users or consumers essentially flock to those companies.
Mm.
And as we progress, one thing I discussed on a number of international conferences is that, the buying power is shifting to the Gen Zs, it's shifting to the millennials,
Mm.
and those Gen Zs and millennials, they research the companies they buy from before they purchase from those companies.
Mm.
They look to see, okay, what are they doing for the communities? What are they doing for the environment? How are they giving back to the communities that have made them successful?
Mm.
So that's very important. And another important thing is that a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of lenders are adding sustainability within their risk evaluation.
So now you jump up almost or jump to that. So my question would be, or a question I could hear other people asking would be, the typical reason why people haven't gone necessarily to sustainability, at least within environmental, going green, giving back, those type of things,
Mhm.
is because it increases the cost to them, and people aren't willing to pay for it. And that's always going to be the fear, right? It's now if I go green, then I'll have, or I go sustainable, and whatever that means to them. But they're saying, hey, we incur an additional cost in order to be sustainable. And now we have a competitor that swoops in and says, okay, I'm just not going to go a sustainable model. And now I don't have that cost. And now I can undercut you on the price. And so is it, it's technology driven, now you can compete so it's not more expensive and you do it via technology, or is it more of people are willing to pay more and you just need to message it right? Or how do you kind of combat the fear that this is going to cost me more and now I'm just going to compete, or I'm going to sustain myself out of the market, so to speak?
So that's the one thing I get to a lot of leaders or especially in small and medium enterprises, because you've heard the term corporate social responsibility, and small and medium organizations and startups,
Mm.
feel that, they hear CSR, they hear corporate social responsibility, so they think that, okay, only the big guys are doing this, only the big guys can afford to be sustainable,
Mm.
right? Now, the way in which I explain it is, I say, you've heard of lean, right? You've heard of Six Sigma, correct? I
Mm.
said, if you implement lean and Six Sigma practices, you're taking a step into being sustainable,
Mm.
because you're reducing waste. You're reducing wasteful processes. You're reducing waste from an inventory perspective.
Mm.
So you're taking the first step. Also, so you hit on technology. I say that you've heard of cloud computing, right? Correct?
Mm.
I said that if you move your processes to the cloud, that's a step into a sustainable process, because now you're using less energy,
Mm.
right? And if you demonstrate to startups, to leaders, that they're already on that path, on that track,
Mm.
then I go back and say, okay, why did you implement lean processes? Why did you implement cloud computing within your organization? To save money?
Mm.
There you go. So that's where you can show that, these sustainable processes leads to a positive impact on the bottom line of your organization. It leads to a positive impact on the planet. It leads to greater well-being for your workforce, because you're making those employees jobs easier. So
Mm.
you're hitting the triple bottom line just right there. just by those two simple things that most companies are already doing, right?
Mm.
So if you continue to have naysayers,
Mm.
there so technology is the key in that everything is on social media. And if you are demonstrating that you have a focus on on the well-being of your employees, on the well-being of your community, on the well-being of the planet,
Mm.
then you're going to get greater buy-in from consumers. Now, there have been a number of studies. That there was one study of a thousand respondents that said that consumers would switch brands
Mm.
to an organization that has sustainable practices.
Mm.
There was another study, totally different study, that said that 92 or 93 percent of the respondents said they would boycott a brand that
Mm.
was cited for unethical practices.
Mm.
So you as an entrepreneur, you as a startup organization, you can say there's a risk by not implementing some of these sustainable practices. Now you don't have to go green and have a green factory that operates on solar energy. But if you're making those steps, if you're able to demonstrate those steps.
So let's dive into that just a bit. So let's say I'm a startup, right, or a small business, and I am just getting started. I'm out, been going for a year or 2 years, so relatively new, don't have a lot of money, and I'm looking and saying, okay, you've sold me. I want to be sustainable. Now, how do I actually get going, or how do I start in on that? What are some reasonable steps if you're a small business or a startup that you can start thinking about as sustainability, or as you're getting your company going, that would be, actionable steps that they could implement?
I would say the easiest actionable step is that link. So first off, you would have to create a sustainability roadmap,
Hmm.
right? And in my opinion, now I would say that the first step in that is to create that lean strategy, to create that lean thinking, to create that lean environment within your organization. And that lean thinking within your organization, that lean culture,
Hmm.
will be focused on reducing wasteful activities. It will be focused on reducing waste from an inventory perspective. And if you have a focus on it, I am only going to provide value added activities. If
Hmm.
it does not provide value to my client, if it does not provide value to my workforce, if it does
Hmm.
not provide value to the planet, I'm not doing it,
Hmm.
right? And if you have that mindset, you're going to be cutting the fat out of the organization,
Hmm.
right? So Jack Welch popularized, I mean, lean and the Toyota production system and total quality management has been around for decades. Created in Japan, but Jack Welch brought it over to the U.S. and
Hmm.
popularized it within GE.
Hmm.
And he kind of made it mainstream from a leadership perspective.
Hmm.
Where he kind of in a way moved it out of the manufacturing realm and made it to a mindset.
Hmm.
And again, if you take it and you translate that mindset from the CEO of the century,
Hmm.
noted by many people, right? And you translate that mindset to sustainability, then that's going to be the first step. And I think that, go ahead.
So I'm going to push a little bit. So if you're to give the top 3 actionable steps, saying, hey, if any startup should think, maybe not all 3 of these fit you, but if you were to at least do one of these, that'd get you on the path. What would be those 3 steps?
Step one is create that lean culture.
Mm.
Okay. If you
Mm.
create that lean culture, then all of those processes I just rambled about will fall into place, right?
Mm.
You're going to be able to remove that waste. You're going to be able to create those value added activities from your organization. Okay. The
Okay.
second
Step
step,
one is create a lean culture. Got it. Now, what's my second step, or what's my second actionable tip?
second step is to expand that lean thinking outside of your four walls.
Mm.
So expand it out to your vendors, expand it out to your customers. Because that sustainability, that reduction of waste goes outside of your organization, and that's where you're going to make that greater impact on the planet, on the communities.
Okay. So one is we've got the culture, and I said, okay, now we've got the culture, and two is we send or take it out to what would be our vendors. Third one.
Continue transparent Include transparency and continuous monitoring.
Okay.
So transparency means that I am publishing and I'm putting my lean processes and transparent to my customers and my vendors. And I'm continuously monitoring it to say, okay, how can I make this better? How can I make this better? How can I make this better? And I lay out those 3 steps because those 3 steps cost very little. It costs you resources and time. Right? So that's why I think that those 3 steps are very important, because it costs very little and it does not take that long to implement.
So now I'm going to shift complete gears, because one of the other things we talked about, and it's one, and I mentioned on the podcast before. So I've got 4 degrees, which my wife always says is 3 degrees too many. But one of them I got was an MBA degree. And, I thought it was interesting. One of the classes you take was more on, workflows and how you identify the bottlenecks and those type of things. So maybe for a couple minutes, let's shift the conversation just a little bit. And so now if we were to talk more about kind of supply chain and demand type of things, if you're to, because one of the things I always, if you're a startup, you always have more things to do than time to do. And even as a big business, but especially as a startup, you always have more things. And so you never really get into, you're just running and trying to keep all the balls in the air and you're juggling, and you never really focus on how do you actually make processes more efficient or get rid of inefficiencies or bottlenecks or anything else, because you're just trying to keep up. So if you're to jump over to now kind of more of the supply chain type portion of it, and what would be, how do you start to identify bottlenecks? How do you start to figure out what is kind of that low hanging fruit that allows you to be more efficient as a business?
So I think that, whenever I consulted with manufacturers and distributors for about 20 years. And whenever we would go into an organization, one of the first steps we would do is to create process maps and value stream maps. So the process maps are essentially the steps. So and you do not create a process map for your entire organization, right? You create a process map for order to cash. So the time the order gets placed to the time that it gets picked to the time that it gets shipped out to the customer. Then you also include the invoicing process in some cases. Now, some organizations will keep that accounting process and finance process separate. But it depends on the organization. Or you would do it from the time that you place that purchase order to the time that you receive that material and put it away. So you have those work streams, if you will, that you map out, and you do each one of those steps from a process map perspective. Now you take that additional step and you do a value stream map where you do a time study to say, okay, for this step, it takes this long to perform this process, right? Now, between step A to step B, it takes this long, right? And then step B takes this long. Between step B and step C, it takes this long, right? So you map out all of those times, and then you also would map out the percentage that process is complete and accurate. Okay. Now, if you were to map out all that, once you map out a process, so again, order to cash, you are going to see very quickly where your bottleneck is in seconds, because it's going to say, man, it takes me an hour and a half to do that process. The whole process only takes 3 hours.
And maybe, but then you get, and you say, maybe that hour and a half that's the value that we drive into, and it's every worth. Or you're saying, hey, that takes an hour and a half, and that really doesn't give any value to the product. What can we do to adjust it? Yes. So I like that idea.
Yeah, so the value stream mapping is very, very, very important. And another thing, Doesn't cost you anything. It costs you time and resources to map that out, and that provides insight to so much invaluable information because you're mapping out that current state, and then you say, "Oh man, there's this bottleneck here." Right now, you say, "Okay, how do I eliminate that bottleneck? How do I reduce that time? How do I reduce the number of errors in that process?" Now you create a future state map of that same exact process. Map is mapped out. You change the process. Now you monitor it,
Hmm.
and now you're reducing waste. Now you're saving money.
And everybody wants to save money. So now I'm going to go. So we're reaching towards the end of the podcast, but I want to say, so if you're to give two questions, and we'll hit on number one, we talked a little bit about technology, and that almost kind of goes everything. You can reduce bottlenecks via technology. You can increase sustainability via technology and a whole bunch of things. But what would be the number one technology if you were to implement to say it would be helpful for startups or small businesses to look at or to implement? Any thoughts on a technology they should look at?
So I would say that you have to assess your digital transformation maturity. And the reason why I say that is that you'll have startups that are working off of Excel. You'll have startups that are working off of QuickBooks. You'll have startups that have some type of lower level ERP application,
Mm.
right? So the first step is to assess what your digital transformation maturity is, and to look at an enterprise application. Okay. You're not going to be able to survive with Excel forever. You're not going to be able to survive off of QuickBooks forever.
Mm.
I know a little bit about that. I wrote a book on it. So you're not going to be able to, but you have to plan for growth. As a matter of fact, for those entrepreneurs that are looking to be acquired, I went into startups. I went into smaller organizations that are implementing ERP systems to be more appealing to investors, to venture capitalists,
All
right?
right. So ERP, figure out what your technology maturity level is, and then identify kind of what's the next step in the maturity or how you can or further evolve. So last question I'm going to ask before we wrap up is, if you're to say the one thing that people are to take away, if they take away nothing else, if they only caught this 30-second clip of the podcast, what would be the one thing to think about as far as sustainability, as far as supply chain, as far as delivery or anything else? What would be the one takeaway you'd want them to take?
I would say sustainability is no longer a nice to do, it's a must do. It's transforming the industry, and people are making their buying decisions based on those practices, and it leads to a competitive advantage.
All right. Hey, I think that's great advice. Well, as we wrap it up now, people want to, and you mentioned you've written a book. I think you've done a lot of different seminars and speakers, and you're all over the place and doing lots of stuff to promote sustainability. People want to find out more about you. They want to reach out to you. They want to hire you as a speaker. They want to hire you as a consultant. They want to pick your brain. They want to read your book. They want to be your next best friend. Any or all of the above. What's the best way to connect up with you?
Hopefully all the above, but the best way you can connect with me is going to be on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn often. I try to share my knowledge as much as possible to as many people as possible, and LinkedIn is the platform in which I've found the best way to do that. So best way to reach me is on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, I'll everybody certainly check out, and I think it's just LinkedIn, and then it's just Justin Goldston, and you should be able to find Justin, and certainly connect up, find out more about sustainability, about how to make your company even a heads and tails above everybody else, and how to get prepare it for the future and the present. So, thank you again for coming on, Justin. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun. Now, for all of you that are listeners, and if you want to apply to be either you're an expert and want to share your knowledge, or you just want to come on and tell your story, feel free to go to inventivejourneyguest.com and always apply to be a guest on the podcast. If you're a listener, make sure to click subscribe so you can listen to or get a notification as all the new awesome episodes come out. And lastly, if you ever need help with patents and trademarks, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Law. Thank you again, Justin. Appreciate you coming on and sharing a little bit of knowledge.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode of The Inventive Journey, make sure to go and check out Startups Magazine. They're an awesome magazine and podcast centered over in the UK. And if the magazine is a digital and print magazine where they focus on tech startups and entrepreneurs, and they also have a focus on female founders and women in tech. So if you want to check out their magazine, either digital or print, it's Startups Magazine, startups with an S, magazine.co.uk. And you can also look up their podcast, which is called The Serial Entrepreneur. So go check them out. They're awesome, and definitely if you like this episode, you'll like them.